Did you know that at the height of the Ottoman Empire, the most powerful ruler wasn't the Sultan, but a hidden queen who controlled the throne from the shadows? A woman so ruthless, she ordered the execution of her own grandson just to keep her crown. Welcome to Topkapi Palace, a fortress of secrets, betrayal, and absolute power. Behind these stone walls, a young prince is dragged to his death. A prophecy of blood unfolds, and coffins leave the gates under a cold, relentless rain. This ruthless ambition, which took the life of her own grandson, created a terrifying silence in the palace corridors. Anyone who dared to cross her path was destined to vanish into the dark. Her name was Safiye. To the world, a Machiavellian mastermind who corresponded as an equal with Queen Elizabeth I. To her family, a silent executioner. Before we step into her dark world of gold and blood, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel to never miss another historical mystery. Let the reign of the Shadow Queen begin. Episode 1. From the Albanian mountains to the imperial harem. History is written by the victors, and the origins of Safiye Sultan remain shrouded in mystery. While European legends paint her as Safiye Baffo, a noble Venetian princess, secret diplomatic archives reveal a far humbler, raw truth. She was Safiye, a peasant girl born in the rugged mountains of Albania. In the early 1560s, she was captured by raiders, stripped of her name, her family, and her past. Packed into a carriage, she was brought to Istanbul, the heart of the world. But this girl was not destined for the common slave markets. Her striking golden hair and pale skin caught the eyes of palace scouts. She was bought, groomed, and sent to Manisa, to the harem of the heir to the throne, Prince Murad. They named her Safiye, the Pure One. The young prince was instantly captivated. For years, Murad looked at no other woman. In 1566, when Safiye gave birth to his firstborn son, Mehmed, she ceased to be a mere concubine. She became a Haseki, a royal consort. But in the Ottoman court, the path to the top is paved with daggers. Her greatest threat was her mother-in-law, Nurbanu Sultan, a legendary matriarch who ruled the palace with an iron fist. Nurbanu saw Safiye's absolute hold over the prince as a threat. In the eyes of the old queen, a prince must not be bound to one woman. The dynasty needed more heirs. As Murad ascended the throne, Safiye remained his sole focus. Desperate, Nurbanu accused Safiye of witchcraft, claiming she had cursed the sultan. Safiye's closest maids were thrown into the dungeons and tortured. Under the shadow of violence, Safiye learned to freeze her emotions. Nurbanu and her daughter Esmahan flooded Murad's chambers with the most beautiful women from around the world. The plot worked. Murad's loyalty broke, and the harem filled with new children. He would father over 50 heirs, diluting Safiye's influence. But Nurbanu underestimated Safiye. She was not a weak woman seeking romance. She was a political chess player. She lost the Sultan's bed, but she never lost his respect. As the mother of the eldest heir, Mehmed, she waited in the shadows, preparing to rewrite the rules of the court. Episode 2. The Matriarch's Crown. In 1583, the great Nurbanu Sultan took her final breath. Rumors of poison whispered through the corridors. Safiye stood victorious over her greatest rival's grave. But the battle for the throne was just beginning. 12 years later, Sultan Murad III died suddenly. His body lay cold in the chamber. Safiye kept his death a secret for days. If the public found out before her son Mehmed arrived from his governorate, the capital would burn with rebellion. For 11 tense days, the Sultan's decaying body was hidden in an ice-filled chest. Safiye continued to issue orders in his name. It was a high-stakes masquerade, where a single mistake meant death. She sent a trusted messenger in the dead of night to Manisa, warning her son Mehmed, "Your father is dead. Ride to the capital before it is too late." Mehmed arrived under the cover of a stormy night. He was crowned Sultan Mehmed III. But his first act as ruler would stain the capital in blood. To secure his throne, Mehmed ordered the execution of all 19 of his brothers. 19 small wooden coffins were carried out of Topkapi Palace, a horrific price for imperial security. Safiye, now Valide Sultan, watched in silence. The era of her absolute power had begun. As Valide Sultan, Safiye controlled the Grand Seal. She forged royal decrees, dismissing and executing grand viziers who dared to oppose her rule. The Sultan's mother was now the de facto ruler of the empire. Every corner of the harem was watched by her spies. Servants and eunuchs whispered in fear. To cross Safiye Sultan was to vanish into the depths of the Bosporus. Episode 3. The Game of Queens. When Safiye Sultan reached the peak of her power, she became a kingmaker, not only in the dark corridors of the palace, but also on the international stage. During that era, Europe was crushed under the overseas power of Spain and the pressure of the Holy Roman Empire. Safiye Sultan had already chosen her side in this global balance of power: England. A woman began to correspond directly with another powerful woman at the other end of the world, Queen Elizabeth I. This was an alliance rarely seen in diplomatic history. English trade galleons began to dock in the ports of Istanbul, bypassing the Spanish blockade in the Mediterranean. These ships carried not only fine fabrics and spices, but also the diplomatic gifts that formed the most important link of the secret alliance between the two queens. England's ambassadors in the Ottoman capital lined up to be admitted to Safiye Sultan's presence rather than the Sultan's. For everyone knew whose hands held the true seal of the state. Queen Elizabeth sent priceless jewels, fine silks, and the rarest cosmetics of the era to win Safiye Sultan's heart. In return, Safiye Sultan pressured the Sultan to grant privileges to English merchants in the Mediterranean, turning the European power struggle in England's favour. Staring at the small miniature hand portrait sent by Elizabeth, Safiye Sultan compared herself to the English queen. One was a queen leading armies at the edge of the world, the other was the hidden ruler of the East's greatest empire. Both of them were fighting alone in a world ruled by men. Yet this friendship would also open the door to a massive scandal. In 1593, Queen Elizabeth gifted Safiye Sultan an extremely lavish, open-topped carriage made of gold in the European style. Safiye Sultan did what no Ottoman woman had ever done before. She showed off in the streets of Istanbul in this open-topped, infidel invention, creating a massive public outrage. People began to believe that the state was nothing but a toy in the hands of a woman, especially one cooperating with the English. Financing this massive diplomatic and political network was certainly not easy. Safiye Sultan's hand, eye, and ear outside the palace was a wealthy Jewish woman named Kira Esperanza Malchi. Esperanza did not only manage the bribes coming from the ambassadors, she also collected customs duties and organized the massive commission payments and bribes for appointing pashas. Safiye and Esperanza managed all the wealth of the empire almost like their personal vault. The gold collected through Esperanza was used to buy the loyalty of the pashas within the state ranks. Any Grand Vizier or Vizier who opposed Safiye Sultan or did not align with her interests was dismissed overnight through this web of bribery, replaced by Safiye's loyal puppets. Through the pashas she appointed with bribery and nepotism, Safiye Sultan also determined the direction of the army and the navy. As she watched the massive Ottoman fleet set sail from the palace balcony, she knew she held the fate of all Europe in her hands. Yet this insatiable thirst for power was about to drag both herself and her closest confidant into a bloody abyss. A storm of unprecedented anger was brewing in the streets. Episode 4: Fire and Fury. In the year 1600, the imperial treasury was completely depleted due to endless wars and the non-stop luxury spending of the palace. As a desperate solution, the gold and silver content of the currency was reduced, a process known as debasement. The Sipahis, who received their salaries in these worthless, clipped coins, finally reached their breaking point. Drawing their swords, thousands of soldiers set the streets of Istanbul on fire and marched toward the palace. Their target was a single name, Valide Safiye Sultan, whom they believed was ruling the empire from behind the scenes. The Sipahis reached the palace gates, beating their swords against the iron doors. The guards closed the gates in panic, while those inside waited in terror for the rebels to break in. The rebellion was so massive that the very foundations of Topkapi Palace were shaking. Looking down at the chaos from the high palace windows, the Grand Vizier and the statesman were in absolute panic. They had neither the strength nor the money to suppress the uprising. They knew that at any moment a sacrifice had to be made. The soldiers demanded the head of the Valide Sultan, but entering the harem to murder the Valide was a massive taboo, even by their own laws. Instead, they turned their arrows toward Safiye Sultan's shadow in the outside world, her black box and manager of the bribery network, Kira Esperanza Malchi. Esperanza sensed the approaching storm and tried to hide, but she had nowhere left to run. The furious Sipahis intercepted Esperanza's luxurious carriage in the streets of Istanbul. What followed was one of the most brutal moments in history. Safiye Sultan's closest confidant was lynched by the soldiers in broad daylight. Her body was torn to pieces and hung on trees across Istanbul. Her massive wealth, gold, and the famous notebooks containing Safiye Sultan's bribery records were all confiscated. When the news reached the palace, Safiye Sultan was buried in deep silence. The friend she had trusted for years, shared secrets with, and ruled the empire's wealth with, had been torn apart like a wild animal. Looking at the piece of bloody jewelry delivered to her hands, she felt not just grief, but a dark, consuming anger she had never felt before. She had been challenged. Safiye Sultan did not wait to take her revenge. Locking the gates of the palace, the Valide Sultan summoned the Grand Vizier and the statesman who had failed to suppress the rebellion. She ordered the immediate execution of everyone she pointed her finger at. The leaders of the Sipahis who took part in the rebellion were hunted down and strangled one by one. Safiye Sultan had survived the crisis, but this bloodbath was only a rehearsal for the true tragedy. The terrifying night she would sacrifice her own blood. Episode 5. A Mother's Cry. In the early 1600s, Sultan Mehmed III sat on the Ottoman throne, a weak and deeply paranoid ruler. His weakness, contrasted by his eldest son, Prince Mahmud, being brave, intelligent, and highly loved by the military, shook the balance of the court. The Sipahis and the Janissaries wanted Prince Mahmud to lead the army, seeing him as the great future conqueror. However, this popularity cost two people their sleep: the paranoid sultan who feared losing his throne, and Valide Safiye Sultan, who refused to share her power with anyone. Prince Mahmud's mother, Halime Sultan, wrote a letter to a fortune-teller outside the palace, asking when Sultan Mehmed III would die and when her son would take the throne. The reply was terrifying. "The Sultan will die soon, and your son Mahmud will rise." But the letter never reached its destination. Safiye Sultan's vast network of spies intercepted it. Safiye now held the lethal proof that would destroy her own grandson. Taking the letter, Safiye Sultan went straight into the presence of her son, Sultan Mehmed III. She showed the letter to the paranoid emperor, whose mind was already collapsing under the fear of betrayal. "Your son is watching for your death. He has set his eyes on your throne," she whispered, poisoning his thoughts. For Safiye, her absolute power was far more valuable than her grandson's life. Under his mother's manipulation, the Sultan signed the execution warrant for his own son. On a cold night in June 1603, while Prince Mahmud lay in deep sleep in his chamber, the door opened silently. The mute executioners slipped inside. By the time the young prince awoke, it was already too late. The sounds of struggle echoing down the dark corridors marked the choking of the dynasty's very future. Hearing her son's screams, but blocked by the guards at the door, Halime Sultan pounded her fists against the stone walls, weeping in agony. But the cold marble of the harem was deaf to a mother's tears. A helpless mother was forced to watch her son slip away into the shadows of death. When Prince Mahmud's lifeless body was carried out, a suffocating guilt descended upon the palace and the Sultan's soul. Having executed his own son, Sultan Mehmed III lost his sanity under the weight of remorse, dying only a few months later. The next morning, as Prince Mahmud's coffin was carried out of the palace gates, heavy rain poured over Istanbul. Safiye Sultan watched the coffin depart from behind the window. There was no regret on her face, nor a single tear in her eyes. She had protected her power, wiping away the shadows threatening her throne. Mahmud was gone, but this cruelty set off a chain of events that would seal Safiye Sultan's doom. This woman, who had poisoned her son's mind to murder her grandson, was finally left entirely alone in the massive palace. Power meant everything, until the next generation arrived to rip it from your hands. And that day was drawing near. Episode 6: The Fall of the Giant. Just 6 months after Prince Mahmud's execution in December 1603, Sultan Mehmed III died suddenly. Some whispered he died of a broken heart and guilt. Others whispered of poison. But only one thing was certain. Safiye Sultan's greatest support in the palace, her son, was dead. And the new sultan to ascend the throne was a child of only 13. The child ruler who took the throne was Sultan Ahmed I. Everyone assumed that due to his young age, he would be easily controlled by his grandmother, Safiye Sultan. But young Ahmed was about to deliver one of history's greatest shocks. He harbored deep resentment against the law of fratricide and the female dominance in the court. The young sultan's mother, Handan Sultan, assumed the role of Valide Sultan and immediately set her first target: to banish Safiye Sultan from the palace forever. Handan Sultan detailed every single conspiracy of the grandmother, including the unjust execution of Prince Mahmud. The young sultan was determined to shatter Safiye's grip on power. In January 1604, the sultan's decree echoed through the halls. The former Valide Safiye Sultan is to be banished to the old palace immediately. Safiye Sultan, who had ruled the world and corresponded with queens, was stripped of her treasury and cast out of Topkapi Palace overnight. Packed into a simple carriage, she was sent to the old palace, the exile home of disgraced royal women. A queen stripped of her power was now nothing but a shadow. With Safiye Sultan's exile, construction of the new mosque in Eminonu, the ultimate symbol of her power and luxury, ground to a sudden halt. Work stopped, and architects withdrew from the site. The half-built foundations were flooded, and the wooden scaffolds rotted. The locals named this massive, unfinished ruin Safiye's cursed legacy. The mosque would wait as a ruin on the muddy shore for 57 long years. The dusty, cold rooms of the old palace became Safiye Sultan's new world. Gone were the bribery notebooks, the English ambassadors, and the grand viziers kneeling before her. Safiye spent her days locked in memories, staring out of the barred window. The agonizing pain of falling from the peak to the absolute bottom accelerated her physical decay. Staring at the magnificent emerald green kaftan hanging on her wall, she would, deeply. That robe was once proof that the entire world bowed before her. Now it was just a piece of dusty fabric being eaten away by moths. By the time she realized how fleeting power truly is, it was far too late. On a freezing winter day in 1619, Safiye Sultan drew her last breath in this quiet room. The death of the woman who once shook the world was shockingly quiet. No janissaries revolted, and no great mourning was declared in the palace. She was now a forgotten myth. The journey that began as an innocent girl in the Albanian mountains ended on the cold stone floors of the old palace, as the most powerful and hated woman in Ottoman history. Was she a ruthless tyrant or a political genius? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more historical mysteries. Conclusion. The legacy of blood. The muddy foundations left to rot in the mud by Safiye Sultan were finally completed 44 years after her death by another powerful Valide, Turhan Hatice Sultan. Today, as the new mosque rises in all its glory on the shore of Eminonu, its foundations carry the footprints of one of the most ambitious women in Ottoman history. Every stone of the mosque whispers of Safiye Sultan's rise and fall. Today, Safiye Sultan's body lies in the Grand Mausoleum right next to the Hagia Sophia Mosque, next to her husband, Sultan Murad III, whose life and throne she once controlled. Death has equalized all struggles for power, bribery networks, letters, and rebellions. The massive power that once shook the world is now fitted inside a wooden tomb of only a few meters. Yet the path opened by Safiye Sultan did not close. The harem sovereignty she built, the Sultanate of Women, would grow even stronger under figures like Kösem Sultan and Turhan Hatice Sultan, who followed in her footsteps. Safiye proved to the entire world that harem concubines were not mere ornaments, but rulers who could shape the destiny of an empire. So, what remains? Deposed grand viziers, executed brothers, shed blood, and sacrificed lives, all remained as mere echoes in the stone walls of the palace. Power was a ruthless monster that consumed those who held it, and Safiye Sultan had chosen to dance with that monster. In the archives of history, her name is written differently. In some places, a brilliant diplomat. In others, a criminal who manipulated her son. And in others, a thief who drained the state through bribery. But no one can deny her courage and intelligence. She was a genius who broke out of the harem cage to pull the strings of the world. Perhaps in the final days of her life, looking out from the window of the old palace, the last thing on her mind was neither the throne nor the gold. Perhaps it was just the memory of the innocent little girl running next to her family in the mountains of Dukagjin. The peaceful, carefree days of Sofia before she ever became Safiye. Safiye Sultan, whose ambitions set the world ablaze and whose decisions shook empires, left her mark on the brightest yet darkest era of the Ottomans and quietly departed. Her story is the ultimate proof of how glittering power can be, yet how deeply isolating and destructive it remains. A life stretching from the mountains of Albania to the peak of Topkapi Palace, written in the shadow of executioners and sealed by a cursed mosque construction that lasted 57 years. It will remain as a whisper, echoing in the depths of history. We wanted power, and we paid the heaviest price for it. Farewell.